Hello, and welcome to the Aurora Podcast, where we discuss topics that are used to advance our understanding of today's world. My name is Ben Lan, and I'm joined with Colton McCoy. We are here at the Walker Museum, where their kind of goal is to create curiosity about our cultural landscape and our natural history. And I'm joined by Dr. Bruce Larson, who is the Dean of Education at Western Washington University. So would you mind telling us a little bit about what you do? And yeah.
Sure. Hi, Ben. Thanks for that introduction. I've been up at Western, and most of my work there has been working with teachers and other community members who are involved in education and helping people learn, and taking a look at how our brains work and how to organize both anything from a lesson plan to activities so that people can remember them, recall them, learn from them, and move forward on that. So a lot of my research has to do with how to engage our brains in that process.
Yeah, for sure. How many years have you been teaching?
I've been up at Western a little over 20 years, and I've been involved in teaching over 30 years. So.
Very nice. So what kind of is your overall goal to teach these teachers, and how do you prepare them?
That's great. So one of the things that we do with teaching is trying to move us away from kind of a sit and receive or a sit and get kind of a lecture approach. We would call that maybe more teacher-centered, and where the students just kind of go along. We know pretty clearly from the research that we don't remember things much at all.
Yeah.
Even within a day, we've forgotten a lot of things. We'll remember whether it was a fun, entertaining, or boring event, but we won't remember much of the details at all. To more of a student-centered approach, where it's more hands-on. Your hands are on. You're thinking about things. Your mind's turned on. You're processing. And probably the best way of doing that is if you think about a skill. If you hear about it but never have a chance to do it, you lose that skill. So if you learn about something and never have a chance to talk about it or apply it or write about it or do something more engaging with it, then that information is going to kind of drop away. So we're trying to move more towards a student-centered approach.
Okay, nice.
Gotcha. Is that difficult to do when you have a wide variety of students?
That's a great question. One of the things that we talk about is teaching differently to different students. So if a teacher has, in a high school, if a teacher has 25 or 30 different students, almost impossible to figure out how to teach differently to 25 or 30 different students. So one of the works that I've been working on the last few years is helping students engage in a process of self-assessment. Not self-grading, like give yourself a grade, but self-assessment, where you look at what was it that we were supposed to be learning today. Did I learn it? And if I didn't, then what do I need to do? And then that helps the teacher know, Colton picked it up, Ben didn't pick it up. I need to follow up with Ben differently than, or vice versa. Differently because of that. So it's putting because I think the kind of the old school, like when you were in kindergarten, maybe the way of thinking was, well, it's up to the students to come along with the teacher. And I think the way that we've switched that, it's up to the teacher to help the students know where they need to be moving to, and then the students can engage in the process of learning and not just being taught.
So is this something that you're trying to get changed in the school system, or is this something that's kind of being gradually shifted naturally?
Well, I think it's both. I think that it's gradually shifted as we've learned more about how our brains work. But this isn't new. I mean, this has been around for decades.
Yeah.
It's a challenge sometimes to get that changed anywhere from college to high school to middle school to elementary school. We get pushback sometimes from parents saying, you just tell my child what they need to know. And we get pushback from teachers, not all, but some teachers saying, that's not what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to just be the person who has the information and then relays that information to my students. So it's a bit of a mindset shift of, I have this information, I'm going to help you engage with it. But again, there's some really good teachers out there that are doing this type of work right now.
Yeah, I think students definitely have different mindsets, and it'd be hard to figure out how the student is processing the information.
Right.
So how do you approach that? How do you know what the student is, how they're processing it, and how they're...
Yeah, so I always, so that this could be too much in the weeds, you can correct me, but so when we look at assessment, like not grading, not evaluating, but assessing, so understanding what my knowledge level is, it's a continuous thing for a teacher. So it's not just the quiz at the end of the week or the card you write on as you walk out of that classroom, or the test after 2 weeks. It's continual, so it's based on the expression on your face. Are you getting it? It's based on me listening to the students talking in partners or pairs. It's me putting them in group activities where after 20 minutes they produce something. So it's this continually looking to see what they're learning. Well, what are they learning? Some learning targets or hopes that we have developed at the beginning of class that I, as the expert, as the knowledge, as the teacher, want the students to get to by the end of that session or the end of that day, being very clear with the students that that's where we want to go. And then it's this constant goal to move towards that as we move through that teaching day.
That's really neat. Do you find that most teachers are willing to like adopt this idea of teaching to the student? Makes sense? Like, are most teachers willing to go with that, even if they've previously been taught by just the teacher teaching?
Yeah, it's a hard uphill climb for some, because sometimes, like I say, you get parents wanting not that style. Yeah. Some teachers have. If I don't know what my students know because I'm not doing that constant assessment, then I'm free to assume that they're learning it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not confronted with any evidence that says that maybe they're confused. But if I'm constantly checking in with my students and seeing what they do and don't know, yeah, I'm confronted with the fact that they're not learning. So sometimes it's easier for me just to not know that Colton's just smiling and going along and doesn't really know it, because I don't have to do anything about it.
Yeah.
But if so there is that piece that it's a little bit harder. The term that I use sometimes is ambitious teaching. Mm-hmm. It's a little more ambitious for me as the teacher to want to constantly be seeing what my students are thinking when they're learning. A good friend of mine at the University of Washington tackled AP U.S. history courses, those APUSH courses, which are historically known for, here's the knowledge you need to know so you can do well on the AP test. Yes. Read this text, listen to this lecture, watch this presentation. And he replaced everything with simulations, which were students' engagement, student-centered, teacher very back of the room, look during the class. Students were engaged in these simulations. His goal was that they would say it was successful if the students scored no lower than the other students in the AP test. And so they looked at all the big ideas instead of lecturing on them. They did readings, but then they engaged in these simulations. Very little teacher-centered lectures and things like that. And they found that not only did most of the all the students scored at the same as the other students, and most of the students scored actually higher on the APUSH test than the other one. So it can be done, but it takes a lot of work.
I took APUSH this last year, and it was very hard and intensive, but you have those good teachers who also are very engaging, even if they're just lecturing.
Absolutely.
But it also depends on the student. Like, I think having a certain mindset, what's kind of the most ideal mindset to have in a student?
Yeah, so there's that work done by a woman, a psychologist named Carol Dweck, who started this area of mindset. Mm-hmm. And her approach was, saying that she sets up this dichotomy between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, where a fixed mindset is that it's based on my ability and it's a fixed amount. Mm-hmm. So I either can do something or I can't do something, just who I am. Mm-hmm. I'm not very good at poetry. I'm really good at math, or whatever it is, right? I just can't learn how to play tennis. So it's a fixed ability. Mm-hmm. And she said that what Dweck's saying is that it's really frustrating as a learner and as a teacher because there's no response to that. And so instead, the growth mindset is saying, I'm going to focus, instead of on my ability, I'm going to focus on my effort. I'm going to focus on my performance. Mm-hmm. I'm going to focus on things that actually can be changed or can be adjusted. And what found was that those people that she found that had what she would call a growth mindset actually were able to improve their performance and their achievement, their knowledge, their skill much higher than those that had the fixed mindset. So then Dweck said, can we teach it? Can we teach somebody who has a fixed mindset to develop a growth? Because if you can't fix it, we're just born with that. Yeah. Like it's a person. Like some people are naturally funny, some people are not. Right? You can't really change a not funny person to a funny person. Yeah. You can teach them jokes, but bottom line is you just can't.
Just like the characteristics, you can't change.
Some traits, right? Yeah. So Dweck was saying, well, can we teach it? Because if we can't teach it, then there's no point in doing it. Mm-hmm. And so she looked into it, and so over the last decade or so, she started looking into it. Thought, absolutely, we can. So you can actually move from having a fixed mindset that says, I'm just really good, or I'm just really bad,
Yeah.
to actually developing a growth mindset. And it's tricky because if you, it only really is a bad thing when you fail. If I am really successful and I say, I'm just a natural,
yeah,
I can just do it. I can shoot the basketball. I can answer the math question. I'm really good at mental math. Whatever it is, mental math is my strength. It's really good. But then when you're confronted with somebody who is as good as you are, or something you don't get, and you've relied on that fixed mindset, I'm just a natural, I'm just good, I just have the ability, you have nowhere to turn. But if you have a fixed mind, you have a growth mindset, then you can say, oh, let me go back and replay. Oh, I didn't study quite as hard as I should have. Or I didn't focus quite as much as I did. Or I didn't practice as much as I thought I would. Or I wasn't quite as in good a shape as I thought I should.
Yeah.
Now I have some, because it's on my effort and my ability. In fact, so when my daughter, who's in her late 20s now, when she was in middle school, that's how long ago it was, I first read this, and the provocative line of this article I was reading was, how to raise smart children, and then there was a colon that says, never tell them that they are. So, because if I say you're smart, I'm saying you just have the natural ability to be smart.
Oh.
So I shifted, because I always say, Ellie, you're so smart, you're so, to say, wow, you did really well on that math test. I bet you really tried hard to be sure. Or tell me that you did so well on that A push test.
Mm-hmm.
How did you prepare for it? So now I'm focusing on effort, on her motivation, on things that she can adjust and change, as opposed to you're just a smart kid.
So you're kind of saying it's more about how did she do it, how did she get there, rather than, wow, the results just mean that she's good.
Right.
Okay, I got you.
What did she rely on other than natural ability, or other on something that was just fixed?
Yeah.
What did she rely on that she can adjust and change?
Yeah. Are there any other mindsets besides growth and fixed?
Well, I think there would be gradations between them. So Dweck is the one that's probably most. I'm sure there are other categories, but those are kind of like these two points of saying you have a mindset that says I'm willing to kind of adjust and grow and change, and a mindset that says no, I'm just kind of here. So this might make it into the final cut, but I'm just going to go along with this idea. There's another woman named Angela Duckworth, and she does something on what's called grit, like grit.
Yeah.
And where grit is defined as like, you hang in there, you got a lot of grit, you're tough, you're tenacious, you don't give up,
Yeah.
And so she defines grit as it's passion, what you're really interested in, and it's perseverance, what you want to stick to it. And so the more passionate about something and the more perseverance you have, the more grit you have. That makes sense. So I'm not going to quit. I really love it. The more love and the more not quitting, the more grit you have. And so she did the same thing that Dweck did, and wanted to know, how can we make gritty kids, right? How can we get kids to have grit? Because if I can do that, they get grit, well, they're going to get a lot of traction. She found this differentiator of what grit was. But she's been looking at that for over a decade, and she's pretty convinced. In fact, including some research she did with the Seattle Seahawks to try to make the football players gritty, right?
Yeah.
She's pretty convinced that you can't teach grit. That grit is one of those things that people just either have or they don't have. And so that's like, we can't pick that too much up in the education world, because where we can pick up growth versus fixed mindset, because we can actually do something to develop people moving from a fixed to a growth. We can't really do anything from somebody being ungritty to make them gritty.
Mm-hmm. So kind of contrasting ideas where one you can teach it and one is just
right. We can teach mindset. We can't teach grit.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that like a fixed mindset or a growth mindset is something that like somebody's born with, or do you think it's more the household that they were raised in changes whether or not they have a fixed or growth mindset?
It's a great question. I have identical twins, and so I had this case study of how much we're born with versus how much we learn. So that nature nurture environment thing. I think nature's huge. I think what we're born with is huge, right? Because I think that you can be raised in the same home and all that stuff and have the same environment and end up, somewhat different. But I do think that the environment you're in does, everything from your birth order, you have an older brother or an older sister, or you're the youngest, or you're the oldest yourself, to how your parents interacted with you, to whether your dad said, hey, you're really smart, or you really tried hard. I do think that gets into us, and that is a environmental thing. So I think that it's probably a lot has to do with how you've been brought up.
Okay.
As initial, and then it can always be changed and adjusted.
So then I'm thinking about this. So if you're thinking that a growth mindset or a fixed mindset is something that you can be brought up, but it's also something that you can be taught, are you saying that grit might be, or are you, I don't know how to phrase this,
Yeah.
but like, do you think that grit is something that then you're born with? Because if you're born with it, could you teach it?
Yeah.
But if it's how you're brought up, can you teach it as well? Like,
Yeah. So again, so not my area of research, but what Duckworth is kind of coming across and thinking is something probably along the lines of, yeah, you're born with a certain kind of passion and willingness to persevere, and it's hard to teach that. Maybe not able to teach that, so maybe you are just born with that.
Okay.
Or very young on, you've developed a belief in that, and you don't really ever change that belief. So it's a. I just laid those up there just of interest. I don't know if that's going to follow through, but I'd love to be able to teach grit.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to teach people to become passionate and to persevere. And you can do that, but you can't really. There's no real strategies that we found that work like it does moving somebody from a fixed ability base to actually the willingness to have a growth open mindset.
Are there any advantages to having a fixed mindset? Does that help in certain situations?
So there's again a college of mine at UCLA, and he called me actually and reminded me one time that sometimes if somebody's never been told that they are highly capable, if somebody's never been told that they have this certain ability, if someone's never been told that they can solve these problems, that they need to hear that. Right? So if my daughter had never been told, "Hey, you're really smart," she may not ever know that she actually has some natural. So I think there is absolutely the need for people to be recognizing that we have natural ability. If there's 5 of us in this room right now, if all 5 of us were to go, let's just use an example, go onto a tennis court and have to serve the ball 10 times, there's going to be not only 5 different skill levels, there's going to be 5 very specific abilities to do that. Mm-hmm. And for me to recognize and I very likely, if I'm at the bottom of those 5 in this room, that I may very likely never be able to be as good as the person who's number 1. I'm not saying my abilities, everybody's going to have the same ability. There's always going to be differences in our abilities. But I can take my level and move it if I don't just say, well, that's what I have. If I have a growth mindset, I can always improve on my ability level. But there's always going to be somebody who's a significantly better athlete or a significantly better student or a significantly smarter person. Absolutely. Yeah. We all have different ability levels, but we don't focus on those. But I think you're right. Back to your original question, being aware of that, I think, is very important.
Mm-hmm. All right. That makes sense. Are you finding that most of your students that are wanting to come in to become teachers or educators, do a lot of them have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? And are a lot of them aware of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset?
Yeah, I think a lot of them think that, and this is the tricky part, I think we have fixed mindsets about some things in our life and growth mindsets about other things in our life. So almost all of them that I work with are, they're major in college, their degree, either a master's or a bachelor's degree, is in the content area they want to teach. So they have developed a pretty fixed mindset that they're really smart in that content area because they have a lot of ability. And then as they learn to be a teacher and they take that massive knowledge about history or about math and they go work with a 6th grader, and the 6th grader is bored as silly because they don't want to talk about it like an adult does, they start thinking, oh, I better learn how to be a teacher now. And so it's either at that point, oh, I can't do this, fixed mindset, or, oh, I can develop some skills now. I need to have a growth mindset about how I can become a better teacher. Yeah. Which opens the door a little bit. I don't know if you want to talk about this now, but it opens the door about that expert novice thing. That experts, there's some really fascinating research that's been out there about how experts look at the world and how novices look at the world. And experts look at the world, and so here's the radical thing that I think, this isn't exactly my area, but I'll just say it. So our brains aren't designed necessarily to always be learning and always be thinking. Our brains are really designed to retrieve information. So when I have to learn new information, it's hard on my brain because it's using a lot of glucose. So it's pulling a lot of energy. I don't know if you've ever studied really hard and just been sitting for 2 hours studying really hard, and you get kind of hungry, you want a snack. You know, it's not just because you're sitting for your brain, by working, it's pulling off energy just like you're walking, and it's using glucose, and so your body gets hungry. You know, so our brains are designed though to kind of recall information we've already learned, to categorize information we've learned to make it make sense. So when I'm having to learn something brand new for the first time, it's like if my brain was a CPU, it would be getting hot, right? And so it would be kind of processing it really well. So if somebody's been doing something a long time and they're an expert at it,
Yeah.
they don't have to think a lot about what they're doing because their brains are already there. And so sometimes an expert will come and work with a novice who's never done it before, and they're not there. There's an inability to connect because that novice is thinking about it for the first time and thinking a whole lot longer. How long have you been driving?
3 months.
How long have you been driving?
Like a year now.
Okay, so I've been driving for like a long time.
Yeah.
Over 40 years, right? Mm-hmm. So when I drive, and you're probably there now, right? But when I first drove, I still remember my second time I ever drove. I was driving a 5-speed car, and I was in first gear, and I went to put it in second gear, and my dad is next to me, and I couldn't find second gear. I'm driving. I've already known how to drive, I thought. So I let go of the wheel, and I put both my hands on the gear shift, and I stopped looking at the road, and I went down to figure out how to get it into second gear. My dad fortunately reached over and grabbed the wheel, right, because I started going into the other traffic. So, but my mind, I was driving along, and all I could think about was, how am I going to get that car, that gear, and I had to shut out everything and focus, so because I'm learning that, and my brain wasn't designed to do that. Well, now I can drive. I can talk on the not really. I can talk on the Bluetooth phone. I can actually have music in the background, and I can really have to look when I'm shifting. And I can I'll talk about multitasking in a second. But my attention isn't going to, because I'm not learning how to shift and drive anymore. I'm retrieving already learned information. So if we think about a classroom, those kids are sitting in a classroom learning about algebra, or they're learning about the Civil War, or they're learning about conjugating verbs, or whatever. The teacher is already an expert on that area. The students are the novices. So there's this disconnect of how slow we go, how much detail we need to go in, how much focus we need to have, and all those things.
So in that setting, the teacher kind of has to go back to the days where they weren't an expert and figure out the best way to teach a novice, maybe.
Exactly, but we cannot do that. We think we can, but we don't remember that work, so we do our best to do that. Exactly. We think, what is it that I, not so much what I was trying to do that, but what is it that somebody who's still learning this, might want to be. And I mentioned the multitasking. It's pretty clear, the research on how our brains work is that multitasking is something we all think we can do, but we all can't. Mm-hmm. We get it we know it real obviously from the Don't Text and Drive campaign.
Yeah.
But it's anywhere from even listening to music. If I have words on that music and I'm reading something, the only way that I can read is that music is serving as a white noise to filter out outside sounds. And the words, I may be thinking I'm hearing the words, but I'm not really tuning into the words because I can't multitask. And to the point that when I think it's something like 30 to 40. So when I were to change tasks from one task to another, it takes my brain about 30 or 40 seconds to get back up to speed. So if I'm doing something, writing a note, the phone rings, I answer the phone, hang up, it takes me about 30 to 40 seconds to get my brain back up to where it was when I was writing that note before the phone rang. So multitasking is a dangerous, it's not always true.
Yeah.
And we have some psychologist friends at Western that did a study where they had a clown on a unicycle.
Oh, I heard about this.
Yeah, riding around, and then students would walk across, and they would go to students who were texting, but were also looking up. So they weren't just locked in their phone; they were looking up and texting. And they would ask them, "Did you notice anything unusual?" And they said, "No." Did you notice the clown? I said, "What clown?" They turned around and pointed at the clown. "Did you see that clown?" And no one saw the clown. And it wasn't because they were locked into their phone or their eyes were closed. They were looking around, but they were texting and thinking, "Can you I can multitask, of course I can, but it never works out."
Okay, so we just talked about multitasking. Let's look at maybe some learning preferences. I know different students have different ways that they learn. We talked a little bit about the mindsets, but learning itself, like how do different people learn and how have you kind of seen that in your studies?
Yeah, it's great. So learning is this. It's if we if we just define learning loosely as like how we have a different understanding or a different insight about something. Something changes, and when they've actually looked at the brain, there's a pretty standard way that most people learn, and I don't mean a way like this is the way. I mean there's kind of almost a chemical, physical thing that happens that leads to learning. Sometimes there's been some work. An older guy named Howard Gardner did a lot of work on what he called multiple intelligences, and his idea was that in a society we tend to value most people that are able to read, write, and do math. And so if we look at who we think are smart people, it's those folks that are really good in those areas. But that leaves out people that are really good with rhythm, or people that are really good with interpersonal skills, or intrapersonal skills and thinking and philosophizing. And so Gardner started out by saying, well, let's look at there's multiple intelligences, not just these three. And that got kind of interpreted, though, in education circles as learning styles of saying, oh, people will learn. Oh, I'm a really good. So you'll even hear people say things like, I'm a real good auditory learner. Like if you tell me, I'll remember. But if you write it down, I don't do so well.
Yeah.
Or other people say, I'm a visual learner. I have to see it before I really understand it. And this is a little nerdy. It's a little bit focused incorrectly in that none of it has to do with how we learn. They're preferences to how we are thinking about the content. So it'd be better to say, when I see it written down, I really prefer that because it helps me kind of process it better. Or if you could just tell me, I get confused and I have to look at something. If you could just talk to me, or if I have to sit with it, I really prefer to be able to talk my way through it.
Yeah.
Or if I could have a journal, I really love to journal. And others would say, I don't like to journal at all. And so, so it gets all kind of a kerfuffle.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I typically do with learning preferences is to recognize that, in a classroom or in a group, there's going to be all sorts of people in that room that will prefer to talk about it, and others that would prefer to sit on it by themselves, and others that want to see it written in front of them, and others that want to just hear it. And so as a teacher and as a learner, I think it's important for us to explore all of those things. So I don't necessarily need to see something to understand it.
Yeah.
I need to hear it to understand it. But that doesn't mean that I never look at something to try to see it. It means that, I'll dabble in that and try to learn that well, because I'll use all of those things to learn it. But it's good for me to know kind of my preference.
Yeah.
So when I go into a museum and I see it, just a quick story in a museum, if I see something, I'll look at it and I'll learn from it. But I really benefit from reading about it as opposed to me just seeing it. If I get a mental map of where I'm going, I'm driving somewhere after this, I have a mental map of where I'm going. I don't need to necessarily see it on a map, but very good friends of mine have to see it on the map, or else they have no idea where they're going to go. So that learning preferences, I think it's important to recognize that people have different preferences for learning, but we all probably learn almost the same way.
Yeah.
Physically or biologically, we all kind of learn.
Have you ever noticed if someone has a particular learning preference, let's say they're a visual learner?
Sure.
Are they more going to have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset?
Oh,
is there any
great.
connection there?
I've not seen any connection. I've not
Okay.
seen any connection. That's a great question. No, I've not seen a connection.
Mm-hmm. You have any more? I don't think of anything off the top of my head.
Perfect. So, as a viewer, let's say someone's watching this right now
Okay.
or listening to it, what are kind of the takeaways? How can they employ some of these techniques or mindset? How can they work to have a growth mindset? Or maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I think maybe the first place I would think about it is when I do something. So here's a great word: attribution. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do something and I'm successful, or I do something and I'm not successful, what do I attribute? What do I credit? What do I blame? What do I give the reason for my success or my failure? Right. And if I attribute my success or my failure, if I give credit, or I give blame, or I give whatever, to something that is outside of my control, then that's a pretty good tip-off that I have a rather fixed mindset. Right? So if you think of where my locus is, where my where my control is located in my body. If it's things that are outside of me, then I want to try to instead look for things that I have more control over.
Yeah.
So if I do really well on a test, or really well remembering something, or really well in a skill, if I can go back and say, oh yeah, that's because I did this and this and this and this, as opposed to, that's just how I was born, then that's where I want to get to. So always to be asking, what did I do?
Mm-hmm.
And here's another, since we're doing words that may or may not be big words, these are kind of fun words.
Yeah.
But it's a great term called metacognition. So metacognition is simply, cognition is a fancy word for thinking. Meta is a fancy word for thinking as well. So thinking about thinking. So instead of just thinking, I think about how I was thinking.
Yeah, I got
I'm lost. So you think about how you were thinking about thinking.
Yeah.
But if you think about thinking, then you're not thinking.
Well, it's
That's
like you're
right.
thinking about how you process information.
That's it.
I kind of think what he's getting at.
Oh, gotcha.
So if I'm metacognitive,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about what I was just thinking about, so I can think about it better the next time.
Interesting.
So let's just use school as an example, since you're both in school. I didn't do well on my A-push test.
Okay.
Instead of saying, oh shoot, I didn't do well on my A-push test, I go back and I think about how I was thinking during that test.
Gotcha.
Oh, I got stressed. Oh, I looked at the clock. Oh, I feel like I couldn't end it in time. Oh, I didn't prepare enough. Oh, I didn't know these things. Oh, I did really do well on this. Oh, I felt like I was locked into this section. I'm not just accepting the results. I'm metacognitive. I'm thinking about my thinking during the test
Gotcha.
to see if I can see other reasons for the results.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So one way to, what's the takeaway? Sometimes I'll say it, I said it earlier with you, I'll say, so what, Bruce? Great, this is all fun, but so what? Well, so the so what is that if I can get myself thinking about what my effort is, what my attitude is, what my mindset is, what my motivation is, then it's going to move me to actually having some actionable items for my own improvement, for my own learning,
Yeah.
for my own takeaways. If I can start thinking about what I prefer, so it's kind of reflection, isn't it? How do I prefer? If Colton's going to tell me something new, how would I really like Colton to tell it to me? That's going to help me then be reflective on my learning preferences.
Gotcha.
Also makes me realize that, I really like it when Colton tells it to me, but I'm not going to have Colton going around with me for the rest of my life. I'm going to have Ben with me, and Ben maybe doesn't like to tell, so I need to, as a person, recognize that, I really like it when people tell me,
Mm-hmm.
but I also need to learn how to talk with other people, or how to see it, or things like that. So I recognize where my own strengths are, and then not only lean on those strengths, but also push into a little bit on some of my areas that aren't strengths.
So the first step would be kind of identifying within yourself how you're processing information, and then maybe think about how you can approach it more as a growth mindset.
Right.
So for students, I think the best thing is to just, identify it and then try and work on it.
Right.
So.
And then as an expert novice piece, to recognize that. So if I want to become a really good tennis player, the best thing I can do is play tennis with a really good tennis player who's better than me.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I'm playing tennis with this tennis player, two things are happening. They're hitting the ball to me consistently, so I get more hits.
Yeah.
They're also modeling to me how to get their body in position, how to turn, how to swing. And I just I'm for free. I'm just out there playing tennis, but I'm seeing this expert modeling to me what I should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm metacognitive, if I'm thinking about that, I'm getting this constant demonstration about what I should be doing. Mm-hmm. So recognize that in the world around you, you're going to have people who are experts who know more, and to really lean into the fact that they know more, and to try to learn from them. Not to be like them, because you're not like them, but to learn from what they're doing and to see what they do to help model and demonstrate what that is. Both a skill like tennis, but also academic like knowledge and information in classrooms.
Perfect. Yeah, I think. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I don't think so, no.
Perfect.
Wait, what's a takeaway for you?
Takeaway for me is, I think in this next year, I think I want to kind of check in with myself and see how I'm processing information, and maybe I can apply more of a growth mindset. I think I might have a tendency as a fixed mindset, but if I want to apply it and try and learn to be just more of focusing on the process rather than the end result. And I think what you said, like trying to find a role model or someone who's better at something than you, and then learning from them instead of relying on yourself, is going to be very helpful.
Great.
So,
how about you, Colt?
I would say a takeaway is that there's both aspects that are good of a fixed mindset as well as a growth mindset, because the only times that I've been exposed to the ideas of both is that growth mindset is good and fixed mindset is bad, and I haven't really heard much about both. So I'm definitely taking away what each is and the good aspects of both, but also how that relates to other people and how, I could say that I'm a visual learner, but I just prefer it that way. So it might not necessarily be that way, like set in stone. So
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Both those are great.
Yeah.
Then I know we're out of time, but one thing. So you don't, really hard to learn alone.
Yeah,
You know,
for me.
it's really easier, better, more effective to learn with others. So there's this great, so if I'm going to be building a building and putting new windows in that building, you'll see sometimes what they call scaffolding, right? Where they'll take pieces of metal poles and they'll build this big web outside of this building with platforms, and then the workers don't have to be bouncing on a ladder. They can walk up that scaffold, take a window out, put another window, because they built this structure outside. So in learning, we need that same thing. We need scaffolds, support systems around us to help us get new information or new understanding. And my example would be, sometimes maybe you ever had a teacher, maybe in middle school, who would give you a sentence stem. It would be like, here's one for like interpersonal relationships. When you say blank, it makes me feel blank, right?
Yeah.
All that is that's scaffolding for you to explain to somebody why they're feeling complimented or their feelings are hurt.
Yeah.
And so it's like, instead of saying, well, Ben, just tell them that your feelings are hurt, I'm going to give you a scaffold. Well, Bruce, when you say blank, I feel blank. Now, what I've done is I've supported your learning of how to confront somebody who's made you feel. Well, that's the case in tennis, like we talked about. That's the case in courses in school. That's the case in paddling. That's the case in all sorts of stuff that you can do in your lives. You have to have some type of a scaffold in place to help you with your learning, because it's not a solo journey.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hope you all learned something new. I know I did. So,
me too.
yeah, see you next time.
Awesome. Thank you.